Okay, so Ruckus has been requested next. Ruckus is a weird one. He's to me he just feels like a DPS, right? Like you can walk up to someone and you can literally just headshot every time, and it's actually a pretty quick kill. Like if you have good enough tracking, you're killing that Ying in what, 2.5 seconds there? To go along with, you have this rocket barrage, which basically just took that Sky down to nothing, and it's a little bit of follow-up shots. Looking at his health, he's got 4,000. You know, it's better than Barrack. It's not great, but it's better than Barrack. What Ruckus has is basically there's two main ways to get your damage reduction. You can either run a rocket barrage loadout where every time you use your rocket barrage you get 15% damage reduction, or you could do the opposite where you have your, whenever you dash you get that damage reduction. And so basically you're deciding, do you want to run that high damage, high burst, not high burst, pretty decent burst build where you still get that DR, or do you want to run that mobility build where you can basically move around the map wherever you want, as well as up. You can go up with it. Most people want to run the rocket barrage because aerial assault has kind of been nerfed into the ground. Let me show. Aerial assault, good mobility loadout. I mean, it's not as much as you would want. You're basically using an entire talent to get the same distance as an Ash dash. And when you go up, it takes two of them just to get up this tiny spot right here. So that's one of the bigger problems that people have been having with Ruckus. And I guess the third way to play, which I don't really recommend, is running Flux Generator. Literally people just buy Wrecker and you're countered completely. What's more important is running things like Metal March, the 15% damage reduction for 2 seconds. If you literally just sit there and save your rocket barrage for every 2 seconds, so yeah, you right click, you shoot, you count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and then you shoot again, you're basically going to have permanent 15% damage reduction, right? And I mean, permanent 15% damage reduction, that sounds fucking great. But if you look at champions like Inara, fuck the 15% damage reduction. You've got literally 25 by standing in something that slows people, does damage to them. And then right after that ends, all of a sudden, you've got, 30% damage reduction, and essentially Rejuve 2. Just right there. So you're just sitting there as an Inara, and you're like, I'm not going to take damage. Meanwhile, you have Ruckus, who just kind of sits here, and he's like, well, I take 15% less damage, so instead of, 680? I'm going to take...
It appears you need some help.
Not much less. It's... You really don't notice that much of a difference, and in the course of a fight, you'll definitely notice the difference, because you'll last 15% longer. If instead of a minute, you're going to last for 1 minute and 15 seconds. That's a huge difference. But to go along with the fact that his damage reduction is only 15%, if you're running your rocket barrage, your mobility is literally just a strafe and a strafe, and then all of a sudden you're struggling. I'm running Chronos 3, by the way. So these are really fast dashes. Without Chronos 3, you can imagine that you're basically just a sitting duck the moment your dashes are down. Let's see. So pretty much the old Ruckus used to be a ton more powerful. His damage reduction used to be more powerful. His dashes used to go a lot further. And Hi-Rez basically, they decided they needed to nerf Ruckus, but they didn't know how. And so for some reason, they nerfed everything. They just took everything out. They nerfed all of his damage reduction. They nerfed all of his mobility. All they left was his headshot damage. And with Ruckus's Bloom, you can tell it's a lot harder to headshot. I mean, at pretty close range. Like, this is short, barely even medium range. I'm hitting headshots pretty much every time, but most Ruckuses are going to be sitting with their backline DPS for the most part, and they're going to be sitting back here, and all of a sudden, it takes a hell of a lot longer to get their kill, right? Now, sure, you can be up in this Pip's face, right? Pip's probably going to run away, and all of a sudden you have this area, but you just use 2 rocket barrages and a dash. You're essentially a sitting duck. You can't do anything for the next 3 to 5 seconds. So, if Ruckus had his old damage reduction, had his old mobility where his dashes would go a lot further, maybe not as bad as they used to be, but bring them up to, like, instead of 15% damage reduction, give us 20%. Instead of, I think it's 4% per card for his mobility increase, make it 5%. So instead of at tier 5 you have 20, you get 25%. It's just those little things that I think could bring Ruckus back into the meta. Beyond that, I'm not a big Ruckus player, so I don't know that much about why Ruckus is struggling right now. He's amazing DPS. He's theoretically the highest DPS frontline in the game right now, without talents. I mean, the ability to do this much damage is pretty insane. It's on par with champions like Victor, like Vivian. Tyra does more, but that's because of her lack of mobility and defense. But I really don't know what Hi-Rez can do with Ruckus. I literally think they leave him how he is and just give him a bit more damage reduction and a bit more mobility, and he's in the meta.